Well, this is gonna be fucking thankless. Okay, so The Running Man is probably one of those properties that sounds like they only should have done in name once, even though they didn't do it exactly right, because the version they did was at least iconic in its own way, and the source material was a Stephen King book, but like, you know, one of the ones that's kinda all over the place, better in concept than execution, and has a shitty protagonist and falls apart in Act 3. You know, that doesn't exactly narrow it down. But like, it's also one of the super coked up, written in a weekend feeling 80s Kings that even King didn't put his real name on one. So retooling the bare bones of the dystopian future murder game show premise into a marginally more self-aware early Schwarzenegger vehicle and brilliantly stunt casting Richard Dawson into a self-parody turn as the villain was maybe the best use of it as a licensed adaptation, because otherwise in the text you're sort of just left with a not as good rollerball wrapped around a general sense of, boy, circa 1982 Stephen King was marginally ahead of his time about the negative effects of reality television, and so unfortunately exactly of his time about a lot of other things. I actually really like Stephen King, but when one of your professional assets is speed and volume, you are going to miss a shot or two. It happens. Also, this new version, which maybe kind of buried the lead here, is trying to be a more closely skewing adaptation of the novel more than a remake of the 87 movie, is directed by Edgar Wright, so that's the other reason people are going to get mad at me, because Edgar Wright directed the Cornetto trilogy and Scott Pilgrim, and this is the internet, which means everything Edgar Wright does forever is automatically good, and if I don't like this one, I'm just an old guy who's probably too attached to the cheesy version with Arnold, so go ahead and finish leaving that comment I already know you started typing, because yeah, I didn't care for this one. Which is surprising because it looked pretty damn good. The cast is good, it looks like they spent a lot of money on it, and as obnoxious as Gen X film nerds can indeed be, I know I am one about certain generational cohorts of director bros who all hit auteur stature in the late 90s and early 2000s. Edgar Wright earned it. I was looking forward to this, so it was kind of shocking to gradually realize about midway through this was not working. And then it continued to not work at an acceleratingly worsening pace, and then eventually the only way it was going to work was for them to turn things around by really nailing a solid ending, and oh yeah, right, shit, this is a faithful adaptation of Stephen King, so that's not fucking happening. Anyway, we're in a dystopian, technocratic, surveillance state nightmare future where everything sucks. Our hero is Glenn Powell as Ben Richards, a tightly wound ball of working class rage inside an even more tightly wound ball of too cute by half expletive-laden speeches about working class rage inside a G.I. Joe doll with a bewildered expression and intermittently blank or manic characterization that mostly screams the studio couldn't decide if they really wanted Ryan Reynolds or really wanted Chris Pratt. Richards has a desperate wife and a sick baby, so he signs up for the violent game show The Running Man, where contestants are chased on a nationwide manhunt by armed killers and earn prize money based on how long they survive, how many, if any, of the hunters they kill, and has a chance to net $1 billion and live if he makes it to 30 days. But also, the home audience is encouraged to report his whereabouts for their own payouts, and the network uses AI-manipulated videos to tell the people the contestants are evil criminals who have this coming and the game is probably rigged against them. And doesn't this say so much about society? So you can see why this is a good idea to turn into a movie, and why it seems so ahead of its time in the 80s, and why it feels so right for the moment now, which is why it ends up being so bizarre that most of the reason why this version doesn't work all ends up feeling structural, in large part because they're trying too hard to stick to very outdated source material. The story of the new movie, as Ben essentially runs from place to place, meeting new characters in mini-vignettes, not really advancing much plot, triggering a handful of decentish action sequences, is extremely episodic and awkwardly paced, with all the world-building front-loaded, very few surprises, and mostly just feels like marking time, and those are all problems pretty much imported from the original story. There's clearly boundless potential here to update this material or commentary for the era of social media, streaming, etc. There's a handful of updates acknowledging how AI and influencers might fit into this kind of media, and cursory swipes at doing exactly that, but it's mostly just sticking to beats of the original book to a genuinely surprising degree, and that doesn't exactly leave its sense of media savvy or storytelling feeling especially cutting edge for 2025. It honestly wouldn't have been cutting edge in 1987, to the extent where Emilia Jones, as a brand new supporting character, basically gets dropped into the story for Act 3 in what would feel like a really hasty studio note for, hey guys, there are basically no women in this whose roles aren't 90% off screen after Act 1, even another female runner. Can you maybe fix that? But you can't blame the movie for that one, only for keeping it. Not that the rest of its third act or finale works any better. No spoilers, but what was always going to have to be a total rework here ends up feeling like we shot 4 endings and tried to find a cute way to use all of them. And if you like awkward ADR, this is definitely the movie for you. A lot of this might have been salvageable if Wright had actually cut loose on the action scenes, but he's weirdly restrained here, as if somehow satirizing trash television in an action movie was where he decided it was finally time to cool it down with the kinetic editing and multi-tiered storytelling, which has generally defined his work up to this point. Or maybe if Powell had been giving a decent character to play instead of a guy who's so angry at the system, but is also perpetually, like, surprised for purposes of plot that the system is as bad and corrupt as it is. You know, in which case, why is he that angry in the first place? You know, sometimes he's smart, sometimes he's dumb, sometimes he's this master of disguise, sometimes he's oblivious. It really feels like there were 3 or 4 different cuts of this with 3 or 4 different takes on the character that all got lost control of at some point, but like, that is not usually a problem this director runs into or seems to, so I really want to know what happened here. This should have been a good movie. Instead, 5 out of 10. And that's probably me being generous, but, at least it's not another fucking Hunger Games prequel.